Hello, and thanks for attending my talk. My name is Ahmed Bakir, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Interface Builder. Alright, first off, if you've been to one of my talks, you kind of know how this goes. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me. So, who is this guy? Ahmed Bakir. I'm the lead developer and founder of Dev Atelier. We're an app development company. People come to us with ideas, and we turn them into apps. I've been working on iOS since 2009. Before that, I was a firmware engineer. I was working at Cisco on the other iOS, writing such fun things as keyboard drivers. Apple iOS was kind of how I would unwind, just by making apps for fun. And then people started paying me. So, question I get a lot, show me your apps. So, first I'll tell you about one of my education apps I did for a client, Video Scheduler. It's a video modeling app for autism. Video modeling is the concept of teaching a task by breaking it down into steps. Old way, they keep rewinding a videotape or put together like a photo storyboard or actually manually do it. It took a lot of time from the teachers, a lot of stuff. With this app, the teachers can record their own videos, put it into a model, and then add customizations based on the student's disability, like if they have low vision. We made this app free for a couple of days, and during that period, it became the #1 education app on the App Store. That was really cool. Another app I worked on connects Me Drive. It's a file manager app. It's kind of like Dropbox, except it goes with a hardware device. So the hardware device is the Me Drive. It's a little box you plug into your router. Whatever you plug into it, like a USB flash drive or a full-on hard drive, will become a NAS. It's really cool because this lets you share files between like your iPad or iPhone and your USB. So like you want to stream a movie from your USB without copying it to your iPad, or you want to copy your photos from your iPad to your USB directly. Just use the little box in the app. So it was a really fun app, and it won an Editor's Choice by Mac Observer at last year's Macworld, at Macworld 2013. Cool. And last app I'll chat about is Antango. Antango is a San Diego-based startup. They do a classifieds app. It has a really complex UI, also a really beautiful UI. It's the inspiration for this talk, and it's also the fastest way to find and create classifieds around you. Basically, the idea is, unlike something like Craigslist where it's a wall of text, this app makes it easy to find classifieds that are relevant to you, classifieds that are recent and local. Fun stuff. They have a lot of content. I think they're over 5 million listings now. So cool. That's a little bit about me. Now let's talk about the topic at hand. What will I learn? First, I'll tell you a little bit about how to get started. This is kind of like a beginner level talk. So just the real simple basics. Then I'll cover what XCode Interface Builder don't really tell you about UI development. Interface Builder is a cool tool because you don't have to do everything in code. You can do some stuff visually, and it'll make a lot of connections for you, but there's a lot of stuff it doesn't do. Next, I'll cover some debugging. Like, I get this crash. What does this crash mean? Like, how do I find out what a crash looks like? And then finally, I'm going to go over some advanced features. So this is the stuff that's relevant to guys who've already done all this basic stuff before. So it's kind of the newer features, like doing storyboards, auto layout, which is like getting your app to adapt for a different UI, like different screen sizes, and then compatibility, like between iOS 6 and iOS 7. All right, so what do I need to get started? Really, you only need two things. Well, three. You need the latest Xcode. Right now, they're at Xcode 5 with iOS 7.1. I stick to the latest because, unless I'm supporting a legacy app, which I'll usually have a separate computer set aside for that, like something that needs to like still work on iOS 4. Apple keeps fixing their stuff, and won't actually even let you submit unless you're on like one of the most recent accepted versions. So usually there'll be the official version of Xcode, like the one that's on the Mac App Store, and then there'll be like the version before that, and the only last submissions from there Part of it is because like the compiler, a lot of times like the compiler changes. A lot of times they'll have like really big fixes, like really big security holes or like Wi-Fi things, and they want to make sure everyone who submits an app is submitting an app that's valid, that's built with one of these things. So I stay on the most recent Xcode or something close to it, and I just get it from the Mac App Store. Just install it from there. It'll like notify you when there are updates. You'll be good to go. Similarly, you want an Intel-based Mac that's running OS X 10.8 or greater. I use Mavericks. We all know it's free. Same thing as last time. They really want you to use the most recent or one of the, better ones, like the most recent or the one before that, because they want to make sure everything compiles the right way. So Xcode, like Xcode 5 especially, I know, won't even run on older Macs, and it definitely doesn't run on like PowerPC Macs. So if you're looking at development, make sure you meet these requirements. The good news is all the computers I sell right now, even all the ones from like about a year ago, even 2 years ago, they should run this very well. I think I've done development on ones as old as, I still use some computers that are from 2010, and they still work fine. So just make sure you meet these criteria. You should be good to go. So why should I learn Interface Builder? This is another common question. Well, with everything, there's an easy way and a hard way. Nothing's ever like totally easy, but if you're not going to use Interface Builder when you're building a UI, you have to do a lot of stuff manually, like setting frames, positioning stuff. It just takes a lot of time, because instead of like working on business logic, you're working on, is this button 205 pixels wide or is it 207 pixels wide, right? And stuff like that. There's really, when you're doing it programmatically, there's no good way to debug it other than running the app and then killing the app and then running it again. With Interface Builder, you can actually do visual layout. So you can like drop a button onto your view, right? And then, set the image attribute, see what the image looks like in that button, whether it's squished, whether it's like the right proportion. Bam, you don't have to like recompile every time. So first reason you can use it is for that visual layout. Something like in Tango, where you have like a lot of layers and a lot of buttons, it's really good for the visual, because you can just preview it and be like, this opaque, attribute is too, like this opaque thing is like completely killing my background. Maybe I should make it transparent. Similarly, it'll reduce development time by eliminating common tasks. Like I said, a lot of the common tasks you'll do when you're doing a UI are like setting the sizes or, doing the positioning, but also a lot of other stuff. Like if you're just having a button where the text will never change, you can just set it in Interface Builder and you're good to go. So, the idea is for it to save you time, and so you can actually work on your business logic instead of manual stuff. Finally, most important reason is because Apple's forcing support towards Interface Builder. When I say this, I mean if you look at their tutorials and sample apps in WWDC videos, more and more they get into this trend where they all use Interface Builder. So like the UIs will all be storyboards, or they'll be referring to concepts that you can only do from within Interface Builder. If you're like an intermediate to advanced developer, it shouldn't be a problem, because you'll be like, oh, this isn't relevant to me. But if you're just starting out, you should try to get into that. They also, a lot of their new stuff just benefits from using Interface Builder, like auto layout. You can't really, auto layout, will make the screen adapt. If you're going from something like an iPhone 4 to iPhone 5, you can build one UI, it'll run on both, but it'll adapt. Stuff like that you can't really do the old way. So just all these little things are how they get you to upgrade. Alright, this sounds too good to be true. Because it is? Just kidding. It's cool, and it does a lot of cool things for you, but it has limitations. These are the pitfalls I'm talking about. So, first pitfall is doesn't support all the possible customizations. So, everyone, if you're new to it, the issue a lot of times a lot of people have is, I want to do this feature or this function, but the Apple public APIs, like the public function, the methods that they give everyone access to, won't let me do this, right? Maybe I should use a different library. That's when people talk about like public APIs and private APIs. A lot of what they're talking about is coming from that. So, and the reason we talk about it is everyone knows Apple has a very strict like submission process where you submit your app, and then a person goes and checks it, and then there's a checklist of like you passed, you failed for this. And one of those things is they don't want you using private APIs, so stuff they bury. Stuff that, like, I don't want to call it hacks, but kind of like little methods they have that you can use to accomplish something that they don't document. So you'll hear that a lot, public APIs, private APIs. If it's something undocumented, it's usually private. But related to that, where this comes into play is that Interface Builder will display lots of attributes for you. So like if you're doing a button, it'll do like the text, the color, the background. But and these are all public APIs. But there are other public APIs that you can set, but they don't expose in Interface Builder. So for example, I have a button and I want to change the text. But and when I say I want to change the text, I mean I want to change the font. I want to change this font from something that's not like Helvetica or Helvetica-like. I want to change it to like Comic Sans. There's not really, for like some of the UI elements, there's not really a way to do it in Interface Builder, so you still have to go back to the code for that. Similarly, the other problem with that is you can't preview it in Interface Builder when you're building the UI. So you say in your code, you want the button to have Helvetica, or not Helvetica, you want your button to have Comic Sans, right? Because you love Comic Sans, but it won't let you show it in an Interface Builder, so you have to manually run your code to do that. Similarly, if anyone's used C#, which I'm an iOS guy, but I like, the development environment for C#. When you're building a UI in C#, it's kind of the same process as Interface Builder. You pick your elements, you'll drag them and drop them, and you'll say what class this goes along with. Well, in C# it'll give you glue code, so you can run your code and it won't crash, and then you can set breakpoints, and then you'll be like, oh, this button handler goes to this function, right? It's all going together one-to-one. Not so in XCode or an Interface Builder. So it's kind of a divorced process where you lay your stuff out, you write your code, and then you have to manually hook everything up together. So that's one of the caveats. I'll actually go over that in a bit, so it's a bit scary, but I'll show you it. Finally, the last item is sometimes crashes are really frustrating in Interface Builder. When I was starting, I had this all the time. I was trying to follow like Apple's example, sample code, and I missed something and stuff wasn't going together. And then I'd run the program and it would crash. Like the app would just get killed. And I'd be like, what's going on? How do I debug this? There's no error, like alert popping up or anything. What's going on? So it's a bit annoying, but I'll show you what it looks like and how to debug it. They don't expose the crashes with like an error pop-up, but there is an error console, and I'll show you how to figure that out. Another reason that's really frustrating is when you're reading it, nothing in that message really says like Interface Builder error. So we'll go over that. Hopefully it'll be a bit better. But despite all these things, I'm doing a talk on this because I think it's a very relevant topic, something that you should try to learn. All right, so how do I get started? The way this works is I'll talk about it, and then I'll actually switch over and get out of Keynote and show you in XCode how to do these things. So conceptually, the way we get started is we open up XCode, we select a new project, and then select your type from the templates. For a lot of people just getting started, a single view application will work. This is just like an app with one screen. So if you're doing something like a timer app, or I don't know, just showing a picture or something, this is a good way to start. After that, the wizard will take you and ask you what device type you're looking for. and your options will be iPad, iPhone, universal. You know, it asks you this because it'll give you template UIs, and depending on what you choose, if you choose iPhone only, it'll only give you the iPhone. iPad only, it'll only give you the iPad. Universal, it'll give you both. So remember that it'll give you the templates, but it'll also give you some build settings to make it run on both. When you're just getting started, just try like iPhone, because you want to understand how building a UI on one system works before you make it super complicated and try to do both. All right, so what is okay, so where, you know, we create our little project, but then it gives us this thing like, where's my UI? You know, what's going on? So where's the UI? What does it look like? So to really talk about that, I need to talk about a concept that's very important. So the concept is storyboards. So when you create your project, it'll give you all this, you know, it'll give you the source code, and in that source code there's, you know, like the main function which launches the app, and then there's the view controller, and then the storyboard. What's a storyboard? So storyboard is a visual way of building and editing workflows. So if you can see in this example, like in a fitness app that we're finishing up, Inertia, the storyboard lets us, you know, lay out multiple UI, you know, multiple screens at the same time, but also control the interactions between them. So something like, you know, I'll press my home screen, and then in my home screen it'll take me to a tab bar, and then as you can kind of see here, depending on when I click on the tab bar, it'll take me in different paths, but I can also navigate through stuff on there. This is a concept they really introduced in like iOS 5 about, you know, 2 years ago, but in recent years it's been getting better and better. I didn't really start doing this until iOS 6, but it's really cool once you figure it out. Key concept here though are segues, or as I often misread them, segues. A segue is basically a segue defines the interaction between view controllers. So it basically, like, it's a transition between them. So if you have a navigation bar, you may have a push segue, which the push segue says when I click on, you know, usually the way it's defined is you say, when I click on this button or this cell, you know, push a new view on top of it. Or another type is a modal. A modal is basically, I click the add button, right? Make this new like add screen come up as like a pop-up that it takes, you know, it covers the entire screen. And then there's also a custom segue, which is something you define yourself. That's a key concept. It's a bit advanced, but I should tell you about it now because you're going to see it and you're going to be really confused. But here's this, it's good to have some background information. Cool. Alright, so first let me show you how to get started. So we open up XCode. When it comes up, it'll show you the project navigator. For our example, like I was saying in the slides, we're going to create a new project. It'll come up. This is where it lets you choose templates. At the top you can see iOS. Beneath it you can see OS X. When you download Xcode from the Mac App Store, both of these come standard. But the one we're looking for is a single view application. There are a lot of different types. Basically, it'll give you a little quote-unquote sample app that implements this basic UI. For what we're doing, we're good with just a single view. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to give it a name. Usually the names are reverse domain. So like if you have like devatelier.com, usually the name of the app will be something like com.devatelier.testapp, like you can see down here. Since I want to keep it simple, I'm going to select iPhone, and this will let us have an iPhone UI only. Alright, then you just choose where you want to save it. Create. Bam. So we have a sample test app, and we have the code that makes it run. We have a place to store images, and we have a sample storyboard, which currently has nothing on it. So that's number one. Very cool stuff. So next fun part, building a user interface. So the way it works basically is there are 3 panes, the left, center, and right. Left's like your project navigator, center is your workspace, and then the right is generally like the attributes inspector. So when you're an interface builder, the attributes inspector has an object library at the very bottom. It's like this table of it's like a table view list. I'm getting super technology-y, right? Super jargony, but it's part of the process, so I'm going to refer to these terms. But there's like that, like a scrolling list with all the different components you can pick. And so the way it works is select the view controller that you want to be your destination. Make sure you're zoomed in. If you don't, it won't let you actually select it. And then find the element you want and drag and drop that element from the object library to your view controller. And then once it's in there, when it's successful, it'll actually drop it on there, and you can like resize it. You can modify the attributes, all this fun stuff. And looking up at the top of the attributes inspector, the very right pane, you can see some of the things we can change include, like for this, it's an image view. It's a view that shows an image. Things you can change include, setting that image attribute, what image will be displayed, the highlighted attribute, like if you're doing a mount, if, they click down on it or whatever, or you set the state, this alternate image, tags, like the transparency, the alpha, all this fun stuff. Cool. All right, so we've created a little app. Now what's next? We kind of want to make it do stuff. First off, let's test the test app. So right at the top, it'll show you the target name and then the platform target. For us, like you can see here, you can switch it out and see how the app will run on different things. But since most of us are going to be doing stuff for like an iPhone 5 or 5S, let's switch the UI over to Retina 4-inch. And then the simulator will come up once it loads, and it'll show our test app. If we want to make it smaller inside of window, there's a scale. Usually I keep it like 50%, whatever will fit on my screen. So as we can see, the app compiles and it runs, but it has nothing on it. So let's put some stuff on there. All right, so I'll kill this. Kind of like we mentioned earlier, I go select the storyboard. I select my UI element, and then I make sure I can drag stuff onto it. So the first thing we'll put on there is a label. So you can actually scroll through this list, or you can just start typing. I like to search. If I know what I'm looking for, it's faster. Then I'll try to drag, and like I was mentioning earlier, if you're not zoomed in, it won't let you drag and drop. So I'll click the view controller, bam, it selects it blue, and then there we go. So I'll put a label here. When you're dragging stuff around, it'll give you an alignment guide, so you can kind of see if something's in the center or wherever. This really helps. So I have a label. That's cool. Let's do the fun thing. Let's compile it. Everyone loves compilation. See what happens. And then it runs, and there's a label on my first app. Amazing. So let's make it do stuff. So like I was mentioning earlier, you can set attributes in the attribute editor. This like right pane. Make sure you have the right pane selected, and then go to the center tab. From here, you can actually set things. So I can set what the text is. I can do it 2 ways. I can do it by double clicking and free typing in here. I'm gonna make an app that shows I'm cool. This is Ahmed cool, right? And then I could do that, or I could just rename it within here. So I could say Ahmed is cool, right? I can change the text color, so I want it to be blue, my favorite color. I can center it. I can do a lot of fun stuff, like I can change the font. Cool stuff. Let's see. This is just gonna be a reminder of how much. Yeah. So I've changed the label. I can also do things like give it a shadow, or setting a background color. I don't really want one, but you know, I could do it. So that's really cool. It's the alternative to, I'll show you in a second. It's an alternative to going in the code and doing something like label, you know, I'll just show you an example. Label, right? New live coding. It's like an art. And it's an alternative to doing something like that, right? Text equals cool, you know, like label shadow color. You know, you have to write this manually, and if you're changing like 10 or 20 attributes, and it's just really simple stuff, it's really cool to do it in here because you don't have to worry about that. So, all right, we set a label. Now let's put some other stuff on there. Put in a button. Search for a button. Do stuff is what I'll call it. I'm also going to change the attributes. I'm going to make it an iOS 7 like button, like a really big button that goes at the bottom of the screen. So same thing. I want the text to be bigger. I don't like the system font. I'll change it to light. All right. I want it actually to be something people know how to click. So I'll give it a background color. And then I don't like the blue, so I'll give it white text. And now we have a button. So let's compile this. Let's actually add one more thing. Let's add an image. Okay, image. Same thing, find image. Drag it on there, align it. It's centered in the very center of the screen. And then save. If we want to put an image in here, we actually need to find an image. So I'm going to take an image from my downloads folder. Let's give Doge. And I'm just going to drop it in here. So add to target test app. A lot of times when you want to copy something, you can find where it is in your Finder and then copy it into the projects. Then it'll give you this prompt. You can select to make a copy and put it in your folder. This way you can organize your files, or you can like link to the original file. I would honestly, unless you've manually added it to your destination folder yourself, I would select this, because otherwise you're going to get into like a little rat's nest of if I move the file, the project breaks. Okay, so we have dodge.jpg, right? Everyone's favorite Shiba Inu. So it's there. Now let's try to access it. So when I go to the image dropdown, there it is, Doge. So we have our wonderful, beautiful friend, the Doge, in the app. Cool stuff. All right. And then let's run it. So same thing. Yeah, there it goes. It runs. But does it do anything? It doesn't do anything right now. But, you know, if we're trying to run it, and I should have explained this a bit better, I'm using the shortcut Command R. But if you go into Product, Run, it'll do the same thing. You can also press the play button. This is basically, I want to run my app, right? Like Visual Studio has a similar concept. If you want to stop it, there's a stop button. So cool. So we put stuff on an app. All right. So hopefully my little demonstration shows you a bit more about, you know, a bit more about like what it actually looks like when we're actually doing it, more than screenshots, just like this is actually doing it. Hopefully you have a good understanding. Now we're going to talk about the hard part. There's always a hard part, right? And this is, I'm just calling this section, and here's where it becomes different or difficult. I was just going to say here's where it becomes difficult, but it's Apple, think different, ha ha ha. So, all right, the fun part. So, like I mentioned a bit earlier in the talk, to make stuff happen, you need this interface between the visual and the code. So to make that happen, not only do we, so to make that happen, we have to give the code a bit of information, like some tags that Interface Builder can read, and then we need to let Interface Builder know what it's reading from. So how do we let it know what it's reading from? So when you open up your storyboard and you select the view controller, the center tab will allow you to select the file's properties. So within there, one of the drop downs is file owner, like files owner. Files owner specifies the class that controls the view controller. Why is this important? If anyone's heard of the term MVC, Model View Controller, it's like an overriding design principle that Apple applies to developing iOS and OS X apps. They have actually a rather strict implementation of it. And what that means is you put all your code that relates to the data, like database queries, defining data structures in your model. That's grouped as your model. Your visual layout is the view, right? And then the glue code that takes actions that come from the view and then make them execute business logic is called your controller. So to hook this up so that your view knows about its controller, the code that's handling all the glue stuff like button presses, we need to set the file's owner. So there'll be a drop down and you can find, it'll scan through all the files in the project and then you can select the one that it belongs to. So in most cases, like the example app Apple gives you, it's usually called something like first view controller or just view controller.m, so you can set it to there. Cool. That's how Interface Builder will know that the visual part, the view, has a controller, but then how will it figure out what belongs there? So to do that, we actually need to go into our view controller code, the view controller.m and .h, and add extra properties. So properties. This is one of the things that really trips up people who are new to Objective-C, because in like Java, in C++, so many other languages, you just say, you declare a variable, like you declare a UI label, right? And then you define it. You say it's of type this, and then these are the properties and whatnot. That's you initialize and all that fun stuff. You write the getters and setters yourself. So like the getters, what happens when you want to get that property, and then how do you set stuff on that property? Well, all right. So Objective-C has this keyword called @property, and then there are all these parameters you put into it, like non-atomic strong. This kind of like defines the getters and setters for you. So when we're reading through this code, I'll show you the line. So it's like the first line of code in my example, @property, non-atomic strong, IB outlet, UI label, title label. So out of the box, when you're writing this, you always need @property, but non-atomic strong, you put those in there to say these are non-atomic operations. That's kind of like saying they can be interrupted. I'm not going to talk too much about that more, but it's concurrency. So non-atomic is usually very fast. Atomic's a bit slower, but it protects your data a bit more. When we're talking about a UI element like a label, it doesn't matter. But just you always put in like non-atomic strong or like non-atomic retain or non-atomic retain or non-atomic assign. And then there's the type of the property, like UI label, and then the name of the object. So in our case, title label. But to make interface build, so that's the standard stuff. But to make interface builder find it, we need to add this extra keyword in front of the type called IB outlet. IB outlet, as you can kind of guess, means interface builder outlet. This way, when interface builder knows who the file's owner is, to figure out the list of properties, the list of things that can be assigned, the way it goes through and does that is it finds everything with IB outlet attached to it. Usually the idea between this is you can have a lot of properties, but not all of them will be relevant to the UI. So maybe you'll have an object that's like keeping track of data, or maybe you have an object that's a counter, right? You don't need interface builder doesn't need to know about that. Interface builder needs to know about UI stuff. So you add that keyword in front of the type to make it be able to find it. Similarly, when we want an event handler, like the code that's going to execute when something happens, like you push up on a button right? Or you release a button, or you change the slider. To make that happen, what we need to do is when we're defining the function, we need to make the return type IB action instead of the default, whether you're doing like a bool or a void. You know, we need to change the return type to IB action, and this will do the same thing where it'll say, okay, I'm looking for event handler functions to generate my list with. Find all the IB actions and put them in the list, because it doesn't need to know about like your is count valid function. It doesn't need to know about that. That's not a valid handler. So putting this keyword in there will help you with that. And don't worry, this is a lot to take in, but I'll show you with some code. All right, so how do we make the connections? Okay, so you know how I said we don't do anything, we don't get anything automatically in XCode or Interface Builder? This is what I mean. So after we've defined, we've defined all of our properties and all of our event handlers and set the right keywords, we'll go back to the storyboard. We'll select the view controller you want to modify, and then we'll go over to the rightmost little subtab. It looks like it's a circle with an arrow in it. This is called the Connections Inspector. I also had to look it up because I never remembered what it's called. As I was mentioning before, everything you've specified in here, like the event handlers and the UI elements with the correct, IB action, IB outlet keywords will appear in here. So the way it works is you can go two ways. You can just click on the view controller and you'll see the list of all the UI elements, and then you will either control click or just like hold down on it, and then you basically you drag and drop a line or control click a line from the radio box next to the element, like background view or image label, and then drop it on the element you want. So like you drop it on the image label, or you drop it on, like the text or the image view or the button. And then when it releases, you'll see the connection. If it works correctly, kind of like you see in the screenshot, you'll see on the left the name in a circle, and on the right you'll see the element on a circle, like image view. It takes a while to figure it out, but once you get it in there, it'll go. And kind of like the last one, you need to be zoomed in, or else it won't really let you make that connection. The second way you can do this is you can actually click on the element you want to set the property for, and then drag to the file's owner, and it'll pop up a list. So I'll show you that in a second. But first, let me give you a bit more background information. So what do we do if we want to make the button do something? It's the same process, but instead of going to the outlets, we actually click on the actual element, and then a list of events will appear. And it's in the same tab, the Connections Inspector. But what'll happen here is you need to select the exact element you want a handler to happen on, like the button or the segmented button or like a slider, and then it'll show you the list of events for that. The events are different for most of the UI elements. Like a slider will have different events from a button, right? But if you're doing so like a slider, the event might be something like value changed. But for a button, most of the time the event you'll be using is touch up inside. What this means is you can handle all the events, like when they start touching the button, if they move their finger around a little on the button, if they, do debounce, where they tap on the button several times. But for most people, the event you want to handle most of the time is called touch up inside. This is basically where they've held down on the button or selected the button and then released their finger. It goes up. And then same thing, you select that event and then you drag over to the view controller, and then it'll pop up a list of valid actions, and you select that. I'll show you. It's kind of annoying. Cool. All right, so we have, our little Doge, our label, and our button. Now we want to make it do stuff. We want the fun stuff. the unfun stuff actually. So how do we do that? Remember, there's really 3 steps. We have to let the view controller know who its file's owner is, who like defines what its outlets are, what its actions are. We need to let the little elements like the image view know what code they correspond to, what properties, and then we need to link up the actions manually. So let's get started. What I like to do with this workflow is I usually like to keep the storyboard around in one tab and then the code in another tab. So to do that, 2 ways. You can do the new menu and then new tab, and then there we go. It'll give us a new one. Or if you're very intrepid, as you notice, the shortcut is Command T. So you can just do Command T and it'll make a shortcut, or it'll make a tab. Sorry about that. So, all right, we have the storyboard in one, and then I want to put the code in another. So I'll select viewcontroller.h. All right, cool. So, oh, by the way, whenever this thing gets highlighted, that means there are unsaved changes. So you want to like save it, unless it's doing some weird versioning thing. All right, so let's make sure the view controller knows who its owner is, like what class defines its properties and actions. So we go over to the identity inspector, right? The third little tab, and then custom class. We look at that and we see, okay, view controller, right? Then we check our project directory and there's a view controller.m. We can also click it and it'll navigate directly in the code. And look at that, it's the one we expect. It's our same file that's open. If you're not familiar with C, there's the .h and the .m. The .h is the header. That's like the forward-facing like declarations. Like I have a label, I have an integer, and then the .m is where you do the definitions, like the details. So cool. All right, so we know that's linked up. Now we need to link up the properties. So let's just check, can we do it? When I want to look at the attributes for this, or sorry, the connections for it, does it show me a label? Does it give me like a place for a label and button? No, it just has view and just search display controller. These come from the parent class, the UI view controller. Another thing, from like object oriented, where it's basically like you can inherit the properties and actions of your parent, and then you can subclass them. It's like, they call it like parent child. Like, you may have your mom's eyes and your dad's chin, but you don't have to listen to your dad or something like that, So, or you can choose not to. So, all right, I want to give it properties. I want to make it so we can see stuff. So let's copy that code, which everyone probably has memorized by now. And so let's add, we have 3 things. We have a label, we have an image, and a button. What's convenient here is sometimes if you mouse over, it'll tell you the property type. But basically you want to create a property that's of the same type as what you're doing. So I can't just type in like label, right? It's garbage. It doesn't know what a label is. It can't autocomplete because it doesn't know where it is. But if I go here and then check the custom class, I can see the base class is a UI label. So it's a UI label. So UI label, we'll call it title label. Same thing for the image. An image is actually a view of an image in it, so it's an image view. That guy. And then the last one's easy. The last one is a button. And a button is just UI button. So let's just say poster, or let's call it image view. Or let's just say poster image view. You want your variable names to be descriptive so that you can remember why you called them what you did, and so especially so that other people can know why you called them what you did. So the last one's button. I'll call it an action button. Okay, so the storyboard knows who its owner is, right? And we just declared some stuff. Let's see if we can find it. Can't, right? It still only shows a view. So like I was mentioning, let's add in that extra keyword, IB outlet, and then let's watch it do its thing. Saved. And this guy loads. Just beach balling. Alright, and then you check this out. We click it. Look at the outlets, and we have action button, poster image view, and title label. Now let's connect them. Alright, so the way we do it, you select your view controller, you select the outlets, and then you drag and drop. So I'm going to click action button. I'm going to link this guy up. Click the radio button, drag, and then drop it on the highlighted element. So in this case, the button. Bam. Image view, same thing. Drag over, highlight, drop, title label. Click, drag, drop. Bam. Now it's linked together. Cool. And now let's run it. Make sure it still compiles. Still compiles. So we want to make it do stuff or change stuff. So let me give you an example of changing stuff before we even do an action. So there are these methods that come up and get called under certain conditions. View did load is what happens when you load the view. Like once the code comes up and draws everything, you can do extra code here like initialize stuff. This guy you don't need to worry about yet. This is more for memory warning, like when it's about, you know, if it usually tries to run this code before it outright kills your app. So let's try to change stuff. Let's try to change the text that's in the title label. Right now it says Ahmed is cool. Let's make it say something different. So the way we do that is you could do, this is like object-oriented stuff. You do self, the title label, right? The property title label dot text equals Ahmed is not really cool. And then you build it, and then let's see what happens. Runs it, and then it's I'm no longer cool. I'm not really cool now. Well, okay. How did that work? How does the magic sauce happen? So let's undo what we just did. All right, bam, undo that. We don't have to undo the definition. We're just undoing the tie, where we tie it together. And then let's try run it again. So Ahmed is cool. What? Like, the issue is even though you know, so it's not doing my code. So the issue with that was I didn't link the two up. So even though I have this label here, if they're not linked up via interface builder, it won't know how to, you know, it won't know what label is actually the title label. Then when we actually link it up correctly and try to run it again, there you go. I'm no longer cool. So that's a big lesson. That took a long time for me to figure out. Sometimes when I was first getting started, I learned the hard way how to fix that. But it's really cool. So let's actually make the button do stuff. We got it doing stuff programmatically, but I don't want it to just always happen. I want it to only say Ahmed is not cool when I click on a button. So how do we do that? So we need to create an event handler. An event handler is a function. I'll show you a bad example and then a good example. So let's do the same thing. So we're going to say button press. We're going to call that the function. And then the only parameter right now is sender. That's the object that sent the action. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do that same code. Ahmed is not really cool. I'm going to cut it, paste it, and then bam. All right. Now, let's see if the storyboard can find it. So we'll click on the view controller. I'm also not following my own advice. Sometimes I get distracted, but basically, like, if you work on a tab workflow, it's really cool to like keep the tab open with the storyboard and the other one for the code. Sometimes I switch. Conveniently though, there are these back and forward buttons so you can navigate. But alright, so I want to make sure it can find my button handler. So if it can find my button handler, it should happen in actions. And then let's look here. Is there anything? I don't know. Right? I click on the button, right? I don't know. Let's just try for, you know, fun if we can make it do stuff. So we drag and drop. There's nothing to find, right? So the way you can usually test is when you go to the attribute, well, when you go to the connections inspector for something that can throw an event, like you know, like a button which has all these events, and you try to drag and drop. If it doesn't find anything, you don't have anything to find. So let's make it work. All right. So we have a what's it called? We have a function. How come I can't find it? Well, part of that is the interface builder doesn't know about the contents of the .m. That's why you put stuff in the .h. So let's see if that works now. Let's click it and let's see if it shows many actions. Nope, still nothing. So the big important part, like I was mentioning, is you need IB action for the return type. If you don't have IB action, it's not gonna know, you know, if there's an action defined. So let's do that. IB action, selector, button pressed. All right, so recompile it. By the way, you can do, when I'm doing my workflow, if you haven't noticed already, when I want to run the code, I do run, but every time I load up the simulator, when I just want to test an incremental change, I'll do build, which is Command B. This is really beginner stuff, but you know, it's good to vocalize it for like everyone who's brand new. So all right, so I have this guy. Let's see if we can find the action. Bam. You see that? It highlights and then something comes up in the list. Cool. So just to, you know, put into words what I'm doing here, so what we want to do is we want to link up the button to the button handler. And so you know how we would click on the view controller and then we could select an outlet? To do the button handler, what you do is you click on the button, you go to that connections inspector, and then you select your event. The event that you want to have trigger, or the event that you want an action to trigger on. So like I mentioned before, most of the time when you're doing a button, you're going to use touch up inside. So I'll click touch up inside, and it's the same process as linking an element. You drag and drop onto the view controller, and then when something's right, it'll pop up and say button pressed. So let's do that. Button pressed. Cool. Well, all right, we saved it. Now let's make sure it runs and the stuff is working. So do stuff. Build succeeded. It's running. Ahmed is still cool. Let's see if it changes the label when I press the button. And it does. Ahmed is not cool. So we don't just need to do that. We can do other things, like we can change the image view. So let's do that. Let's add in another Doge. Same process. Copy. Finish. Bam. I want to save it. Now what I want to do is I want to change the image view. So you see how in this one of the properties is doge.jpg, or the way we get the one-to-one on that is there's a, I'll show you. Well, first let's reference the image view. Oh, by the way, if you don't like how something's spaced, you can select it, right click, do restructure, and it'll re-indent correctly. Old habits have drilled me into four space padding for a tab. So I'll get the image view, right? Self.poster image view, and then I want to set the image. You can't just do, you know, you can't just do whatever is equal to UI image. That won't work because the classes are different. But what you want to do is dot image, right? Equals. You could also do set image, but this is a style thing. This is more like this line of code is C++ style. This line of code is Objective-C style. You can do either, but I really recommend picking a style and sticking with it, because otherwise you're going to confuse yourself later down the line. So I want to set the image, and the way we do that is UI image, image named, and then what you type in here is the name of the image you want to change. So it's called change to, so it's time.jpg. And then let's do this. Let's run and see what happens. So now I'm telling it when I click the button, change the label and change the image. So let's see. Will it change the image? There we go. It changes the image. It's a bit stretched, but it changes it. One more note. So part of the reason that I'm not, so you can do a couple of things in Objective-C. It's a style thing, but when I'm writing code, I want to make it readable. So you know how I was saying, like, doing something like this is valid, but it could get, you know, it's Objective-C style, and it could get complicated. The reason it gets complicated, the reason I don't always do this, is what this guy wants is it wants you to put in another, you know, the parameter is an object. And I could do it in two ways. I could do something like image object equals whatever, right? That line of code. Or I can, you know, bam. And then I could do this, which is legible code. but sometimes you'll see another type which is like that. And what this means is like you can declare this guy on the fly and put it in there, but it makes it way less readable. So when you're going through your styles, just think about that. Pick a style that's consistent and pick a style that makes sense to you and the person who's going to be reading your code after you. Because a lot of times we'll write code, but you know, like the higher, like you'll get like somebody to help you out, or you'll take over somebody else's code. Okay, cool. Good stuff. Part 4. We've made it this far, right? We can keep going. Segues. So how does this work? So you know how we were able to click on the button and then set the action for the button? If it's like, you know, in our case, we were changing the text label, you know, like we were changing the text in the text label. But sometimes you want an action that'll move you to another screen. So like in OCHA, the T app we're finishing up, I want to click on the button, the done button, and then I want to get rid of the congratulations screen. So how do I make that happen? Well, you know how usually we would click on the element and then click on and then drag it to the owner to say perform this action on the owner? Well, if you want to move to another view controller, generally the way it'll work is you'll do the same thing. You'll click on the send event, and then instead of dropping it on your view controller, you'll drop it on another view controller. And then what will happen is it'll pop up a list of segues, and you pick the one you want. So if you're in a navigation bar, most of the time, like I mentioned, it'll be push. Otherwise, it'll be modal, unless you're super awesome and then you have your custom one. So, you know, same process, connection inspector, select the event, but then it'll be a segue that you're using instead of, what's it called, an actual like event handler. There's other ways to do this, but this is just one way. Alright, so our app has a button, it has an image, it has a label, and we saw that we can change the image and the label. Now, not all apps are single screen apps, so we have to make it multiple screens. Now, let me show you how we do that. So, you know, I was talking about storyboards. You know, in the example I showed on my slides, I had one with multiples, and you know, the way I do that is you drag multiple view controllers on there and you make connections. So let me show you how that works. So just gonna add more. You can always rearrange these, whatever order looks better for you. If you're super OCD, you can even align the left, right, just whatever makes it easy for you to view. So I'm gonna add like 3 or 4. Then I'll scroll to the left. Bam. There we go. Let's resize it. Okay, so I have multiple views, multiple view controllers. How do I get them together? All right, let's figure that out. So let's try to run it. Our favorite step. Comes up, button still just changes images. I want it to change to another screen. So, all right, let's make our second screen. So we'll do an almost similar thing. Well, we'll do something very similar actually. We'll make a, you know, a screen with a label, a button, and an image. Bam, bam, and view. Bam. All right, cool. Got our image. Let's align it. Same thing, same basic process. Nothing really specific about this. All right. And then this time, so that the image looks a bit better, you know, I'll make it blue. That way we know we're on a different button. All right. Do more stuff. All right, cool. And the process is the same as what we did last time. So we have this view controller, but it's not going to do anything until we make code. So how do we make code for a new view controller? Go to New. Go to File. And then Objective-C class. For a view controller, we're going to do it based on the subclass, so it's going to be view controller. This one we'll call it second view controller. Let's create it. Gets added to the project, right? And then let's link it up. So select the view controller, go to custom class, second view controller. Now it knows about it. We have the same elements, so we can actually take the same properties and move it over. Or you could subclass, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to make it more complicated than it has to be. And then on this one, we're going to say Ahmed is so cool. Right? And these are totally different labels and totally different images. But I'll just show you. So Time Magazine, my favorite dog, Suchir, much person. And then we'll have a similar. You don't have to, something with the fonts is you don't always have to use Helvetica, so you can do something like Party. But the issue is these are all fonts that the system recognizes, that Xcode recognizes. If there's one you don't want to use, the one that you can use separately, you can manually force it in there, but you won't get the preview. This is one of the gotchas that I was referring to. All right, we have our second view controller, and it links up. But it won't go anywhere. So how do we make it go somewhere? Okay, kind of like what I was referring to. We just changed the action. So we'll click on our first button. And then before, you click on the button, you click on the event, and you drop it on your view controller. And then you get the action for that. Well, if you want to go to another view controller, do the same process. But I'll show you an example. Touch up inside will go somewhere else. So you don't use sent events, you use triggered segues, and then what you do is you select who you want to transition to. So like the actions are stuff that is IB action that you refer to inside of your class, but when you go to something else, use a segue. So you can click action and drag it to your destination, and then do push or modal. In this case, we can't do push because we don't have a navigation bar, but we can do modal, and then it'll show it as a pop-up. And there we go. There's a little guy. Then let's try to run it. Okay, Ahmed is so cool. Do stuff. Ahmed is really cool. And there we go. Now we have it moving from one to the other. So that's really cool. But maybe I want an alternate path, right? So same process. We'll do another button. I don't think so. Right? We'll have a second button so it's easy to see. And then we'll make this go on a different path. So I'll show you how that works. We'll make this a green button or clear text. White text, green background, or oh no, not that. Tint is something different. Tint is a system thing. You shouldn't worry about that for now. All right, do stuff. I don't think so. And then we want to make I don't think so do something. So same basic idea. I just want a label, right? This guy will say, I don't think he's cool. Right. There we go. And then, same process. Make a new class. This time I want to be object oriented, so I'm going to, instead of making a new view controller, I'll actually inherit the properties of the view controller. This way I don't have to redefine the label and all that fun stuff. And there we go. Third view controller. Set the owner. His owner is, come on guy, not UI view. When that happens, like when you're trying to click and it gives you the wrong one, you can go over to this left pane and try to select find your right place in the hierarchy. So for me, I want UI view controller. Then third view controller finds it. I want to link this guy up. Referencing outlet. Bam. Title label. Now it's set up. Now, let's make this button go to that view. So we could do this, or second thing, if you select the element, and then option click, not option, sorry. control click, Mac keyboards, control click down, you can do the same thing. So we'll do a modal. And then now let's play with our app. Okay, so do stuff takes me here. I don't have a back button yet because I don't want to. I can show you what that looks like. I don't think so. Will take me to the other guy. If I want a back button, if you haven't figured it out yet, all I do is just make a button that goes back home. And then we'll do modal for now. I just want to keep it easy. And then there you go. I don't think so. That goes nowhere. Because why you can go anywhere if you don't think Ahmed's cool. Just kidding. Do stuff takes you to time. Do more stuff will take you back. So it's cool stuff. And as you can see, it'll actually show you the connections because I just made a loop that went back around, and you can see it kind of made a bad path. Sometimes this actually helps you visualize if your logic is correct or not. If I want to go back, there's a better way to do it. Hopefully I can show it to you a little bit later. Okay, so it's doing stuff. Now, we want one last part, which is how do we make it do an event? Let me go over to the slides and then we'll be right back and I'll show you how you do that. Cool. So we've made it select that, right? And we've made it go from one view to the next. But then how do we, really, so we'll push it from one to the next. But, a lot of times when you're pushing something, you want to show detail. So how does this really work? Two ways. So, usually the concept when you're doing like a UI, when you're pushing something from one to the other is, in your message, you'll have, in your message, you'll tell it what the data is and it goes from one to the other. The cool thing with storyboards, the reason why I'm telling you about them, not just to waste your time, is they actually have APIs which make it a lot easier. And the way you do that is by giving your segues a name. So I'll show you in a second. But when you're in the attributes inspector, you can actually click on the segue itself. There's when you look at those lines, there's always an icon in the middle. You click on that, it'll actually let you set an identifier. So give it a unique name, and then when you switch back to the code, one of the functions that's stubbed out, or that you can just implement is called prepare for segue. So what you do here is you get the signature and then you start defining it, and then in there one of the parameters is called segue, and you can actually get information about the segue like that you're going to or the button that you sent stuff from by accessing that. So say I want to send my user details from the current view to the next view. The way I do that is I would say whatever, like me dot data object, right? I would use, that's what holds the information on my current view. To push it to the next view, I'd say, segue dot destination view, destination controller, which is the target. It's cool API because you can actually get this information about your destination from the connection. Because when you lay everything out, it goes from one to the other. It'll make that connection for you. So you can say like segue dot destination controller, and then cast to get the class of the destination, like I don't know, second view controller, and then in there you can actually say something like second view controller dot data object equals me dot data object. So this is a cool way of passing things from one to the other. I'll actually show you. It's cool stuff, and it'll help a lot. When I was doing like the Me Drive app, I wanted to do everything through storyboards because it would have made it faster. Stuff like, oh, press this cell and then show like the video that was indicated by this cell. But there were so many combinations I couldn't do it. For most apps, like the vast majority of apps, where you click on one thing and then it'll present one, most of the time, like when you have one list and you're getting the details for that one list item, you can actually just do that just directly, just with a segue destination controller. Alright, so we've created a storyboard and some segues, and we're moving between one and the other. Now we want to move data between two view controllers. So how do we do that? Alright, let's get started. So the first step, let's name the segue. So just click on it, click on the little icon, give it a name, something you remember, show second view, and then change the properties if you need to. So in my case, I want to change the animation. So it's going to be a dissolve. That's step one. Step two, we need to write code. We need to say, how do I go from the source to the destination? In your source, and when I say source, I mean like the original guy on the segue, we're going to implement that little function I was chatting about a little earlier. We're going to implement this guy, prepare for a segue. So, in here, we go, prepare for segue, bam, and then there we go. You saw I was able to do autocomplete. That's because when I inherited UI view controller, this is one of the methods I inherited. So I'm basically, we like to call it overriding it. I'm basically like gonna create my own implementation for it, an OO concept. So what do I want to do? Well, looking back at this, we gave it a unique name, and then we want to do something with the destination controller. So first, let's get the destination controller. So let's try to access it. Okay, if you check here, the type is ID. That's just a generic thing. So we want to set a property on the second view controller. If we look at the second view controller, these are the properties that we showed at the outside: title, label, poster, image, view, action button. But it's not going to know about those unless the object is the right type, unless it's a second view controller object. So how do we get that information in? I got overly excited during a break and I started writing it. But basically, the way you do it is you do import and you import the .h. And then this guy, we want to set the variable, we want to set the properties. So what we're going to do is when we access it, we make a variable, and then we dump the output of, we dump this guy into that variable. But to make sure everything's preserved, we have to cast it. So we add a cast. One sec. Mute output. All right. So did the cast. Now fun stuff works, and does it compile? It compiles. But we need to do something, otherwise we get this error message. So I want to try to set the title label text. Right? I want to say Ahmed is super awesome. Right? I went from being really cool to super awesome. Let's see how that works. Let's see if it does anything. So we'll run it. Push the button. And then it shows up, but I'm not super awesome. So how do we fix that? Well, I'll start giving you some hints, and then I'll show you a very brief bit of debugging, but I'll go over it more in the next one. So the first hint is I totally ignored this part, the unique name. So what I should be doing is I should execute this code only when the segue for our unique segue gets called. Right now, it's just gonna call it when any segue happens. All right, so let's do that. So segue.identifier is equal to string. Boom, boom. Show second view. Then it'll actually run the code. Cool. All right, awesome. And then this is not compiling because I left out some braces. All right. Then there's a second part. This won't actually work because this doesn't exist yet. I know that because I've been doing iOS for so many years. But a better way is we should store this in something that will happen. So I'm just going to make a new property called string. I'll just put this in a string and then set the string. So the reason it won't work is because the way Interface Builder does its thing, the way it compiles is you do the visual layout in here, and then you set the properties, and then when it's actually drawing the screen, then it'll initialize the objects. So this guy won't work if I do this directly, because even though this object exists, these these little properties, they don't exist yet. They haven't been drawn. It knows about them, but there's nothing there. So we'll just set the text. And then what we'll do is when it does exist, then we'll set it. So, all right, let's go back. And then in here. So when it does exist, how do we do that? So we do it in view.did_load. And then what we'll do here is we'll set the text for the label equal that string. And now let's see if it works. All right, do stuff. Ahmed is super awesome. It worked. So that's how we pass it along. Remember, you need to cast so that you can actually get at the properties. You need to use the identifier so you can know what segue you're using. And then you need to make this connection. Otherwise, it won't actually do anything. Cool. So let's go back to some slides, and then I'll actually show you how I debugged it, how I knew how to fix that. So, all right, let's get back to the thing at hand. Debugging crashes. So what does a crash look like? We've all seen it. We're using an app. We try to click on a button, and then the app dies. The app just kills itself. That's a crash. The way Apple handles it is instead of, I'm going to bring in the holy war of platforms. But instead of like blue screen of death or showing you an error message and all this debugging information and memory dump, it'll just kill the app. This makes the user, this makes user experience very fluid, and it just says, "Oh, this thing died." Well, forget that. So that's what a crash looks like. Why is it important? Well, obviously you don't want an app that crashes, because people will not be able to do what they're trying to do with the app, and they'll rate you negatively. But Apple won't really, if you have a good reviewer, Apple won't even, well, actually if you have an average reviewer, right? Most of the reviewers who do Apple stuff, it's all humans. It's not a computerized thing. It's not like Google where you just say, here's my app, put it on the App Store or put it on Google Play. It's actually human reviewed, and like the #1 item in their checklist is crashes. So if they're going through the normal flow of the app and then it crashes, you're probably going to get rejected. Most of the time when an app gets rejected for a submission, it's because of a crash. Other reasons include stuff like including an Apple logo or, making a copy of an Apple app or something. But crashes are the really big one. Crashes are like the one, objective, like no subjective at all, one objective way to get rejected every single time. And like I mentioned, what does it look like? We all know on user experience what it looks like. Your app just dies. But when you're debugging, what it'll look like is you'll see, I'll show you a bit more. But if anyone's familiar with the breakpoints, it'll actually trigger a breakpoint. Well, kind of. It'll highlight the line of code where it got killed, usually the application main. And then it'll say something like sigabort, sigenv. And then this little panel will pop up below the main panel, which is called the debug. It's the debug area. And on the left side will be your local variables, and on the right side will be this dump. So in that dump, it has the reason for the error, the stack trace, which is like the last 10 functions it went through before it crashed, and then memory, like the memory contents on stuff. I still haven't really used the memory contents part for debugging iOS stuff. We used to use it when we were doing firmware stuff, but for most app level stuff, you're not going to use that. But the big two are the stack trace and the reason for the error. And you'll see why they're important a bit. If you've done other programming, right, especially other debugging, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about and know why it's important to do the stack trace and get the reason for the error. Cool. So debugging crashes. So, part of the reason people get scared by Objective-C is that Objective-C was developed at the same time as C++, but it was developed in parallel. So C++, I actually did C++ way before I did Objective-C, and then I did Java. So like I really like that syntax of how they do objects and how to do object orientation. But at that time, like C++ was doing their own implementation and Objective-C was doing their own, and the Objective-C guys took their implementation from like the leading object-oriented programming language at the time, which was Smalltalk. So when you see like that weird syntax, you're like, what the heck is this? This isn't C. It's Smalltalk syntax. But why is that relevant? Because basically it's relevant because they're implementing Smalltalk style message passing and a language that's built on top of C. So why is that important? It's important because all the C developers out there will love this or hate it. When you're going through the debug console and doing all that stuff, the debug console and the debug tools are actually using a derivative of GDB, the GNU debugger, which is the C debugger. It's actually LLVM and the LLVM debugger, but LLVM is a derivative of GDB. So okay, that's putting it all together. When you see a crash, it'll give you like the C-style output from your Smalltalk language, and then he'll use like the C-style tools to debug it. So how do we debug it, right? The way I like to debug things is I'll set a breakpoint. A breakpoint is basically where you say execute the code until this point. And then I like to set the breakpoint based on the last function of the stack that I recognize. The stack is basically the last 10 instructions that happened in the order that, reverse order that they happened. It's like a stack of cafeteria trays, right? The last one is first at the top of the stack. And then I'll go through that and see what I recognize. A lot of those will be like really weird names that are auto-generated or like Apple functions that you don't have debug information. But at least one of them usually will be something that you wrote. Or get triggered by something that you wrote. So I like to find that function name, where it is, and then set a breakpoint in there where I think the problem's happening. Like, it gives me like null object error. So, but it's coming from this function. So I'll set like a breakpoint at the very first line of that function. And then from there, what happens? So I will stop the code, I'll run it again, and I'll run it to the breakpoint. If it crashes before it gets to the breakpoint, I know that it's something that's happening before that function gets called. So I repeat the process. I will go to the function before that, set a breakpoint, try to make it run. If it doesn't run, another function's crashing. So that's how you go through the stack and find out which function it is. Then within there, once you've found the function, what you do is two things. There's a little icon that looks like a hop, like hop over. You use that to step through lines, and then you step through the lines till you find the one that crashes. Then when you found the one that crashes, you can actually look at the memory contents. There are two ways. In the very bottom, there is the variable pane, so you can actually see in there if anything's nil. Nil is like null, it doesn't exist, you never initialized it, you never set it. But you can also do a print object in the command line, the GDB command line, and it'll actually dump memory contents from there. So a lot of times when you have a crash, it'll come from mostly two things. Either you're either trying to use a variable or an object that's still nil that like was never initialized, or you're trying to call a function that doesn't exist or wasn't defined, and then the thing's trying to say like call this function on this object, and then it crashes because it can't find it. So yeah, that's the basic process. We'll set breakpoints and then inspect variables and keep going through the stack until I figure out what it is. And then from there, that's really the part where you go from just being a coder to like an engineer. The whole problem solving step of like figuring out what caused what and that, and it's fun stuff. Everyone who's written code knows like writing the code is the fun part, but debugging it is horrible. And that's why like people hate other people's code, because you're trying to recreate their logic and figure out the problem. It's like CSI, except code. And no cool sunglasses. So cool. All right, now I'll show you how to do it. All right, so we're back to code. Now, the the fun part, debugging. What is debugging? What does it look like? How do we do it? So first, let's see a crash. I hid some code in here, and then we're gonna try to figure out where the crash is, what's causing it, all that fun stuff. So I hid it. I'm not gonna tell you where. Let's figure out where it goes. So, okay, using my app. I don't think so. That still works. Okay, that's cool. Let's see if the other button works. What? It doesn't work. So the app kind of stops. We get a Singapore, and then all this stuff comes down here. So you know how in the notes when I was talking about console log, all that fun stuff, this is what that is. It shows you there was a crash with a type NS exception, uncaught exception. There's a stack trace, and then there's the error message. So it says terminating app due to uncaught exception, index 4 beyond bounds. Okay, what does that mean? How does that happen? What's going on? So see this? I'm looking through these. I don't know what segue template is. I don't know what send action is. What here looks like something I could see? Well, I see test app in there. Test app view controller. I know these symbols. This means something in the view controller object or something in the view controller class in my test app. There's a problem there. What could that problem be? So let's see. I notice when I click the button, then something happens. So this is using, well, so that kind of like starts narrowing it down. So I'm like, okay, something in the button handler. Well, for us, remember the button handler is prepared for segue. So let's go there. All right, I don't see any error messages here. What's going on? So I don't know what's in here. So let's figure it out. So I'll set a breakpoint. Like I said, you set a breakpoint by just clicking on the line number. Usually you want to do the first line of the function, not the top. This guy will execute when it's compiling the code. You don't want that. You want to see what happens when it's actually running the code. Another thing with crashes is their runtime. So you see there's no red flags. The code is compiling, but something when we try to run it is giving us a crash. So that's what we mean by a crash. So let's run it again, this time with a breakpoint. Alright, let's see what happens. Do stuff. It gets to the breakpoint. It's still green. Alright, now next one. Remember how I was saying we need to step over and step through the tools? So, you know, set a breakpoint, use the variable pane, look at the memory, this guy down here, and then continue inspecting breakpoints and variables to find the cause. A lot of times something will be nil or something will be undefined. So let's step through it. Step over. Does this line of code run? Yes, it runs. Does this line run? Yes, it runs. Let's see memory. So I can do two ways. I can go through here and it'll show me. Here I was setting some strings, right? And then these are the contents. And then let's keep going. So does this run? Yes, that's right. What about this? No, it crashed. That's how I find out which line of code is bad. And then I reference this guy and it says index 4 is beyond bounds. What does that mean? So here I'm assuming that there are 5 objects in the array. Well, looking at the array, there's only 3. 1, 2, 3. So if I do this, change it from 4 to 2, something that's actually valid, maybe it'll work. And does it work? Let's see. Step. It went through. And then there we go. It set it. So instead of setting the text to Ahmed is super awesome, I'll set it to Larry. So we debugged it. That's cool. Now how do we fix my other error where, you know, we were trying to set the string, but it wasn't setting? Well, similar process. Let's go back to where we were. How do we find out it was nil? So, by the way, this is a compiler warning. Yellow is a warning, red is an error. These may cause problems later down the line, so that's why they're warnings. It's either like you're doing something inefficiently, you're not using something. So I'll comment that out because I don't really want to see it. I just want to focus. So let's try to do this. Let's step through it, and then, you know, let's see what's happening in memory. Why is it not setting? Let's try to figure that out. So it shouldn't crash, right? Alright, so it gets to that code. That's cool. Now, I'm trying to set this property on this. I don't know if it exists or not. So let's figure out if it exists. So we can drill down and see. Well, it's nil. So, you know, it won't. So this is really easy. What this tells me is, I want to go through this and then find stuff that exists or is nil and check the memory, see if it exists. Remember how we look at the array? It'll tell us, oh, you have an array with Bob, Joe, and Larry, and we could see it in here. Well, here when we inspect these properties, we see it's nil. That means it was never set. So we're trying to set .text on something that doesn't exist. It'll either crash or won't set it. In our case, let's see what happens. We have another one. Let's see what happens. So it should be set to Ahmed is super awesome, right? But it's just blank. Because what happened was title label was nil, right? And then when we're going in second view controller, I'll break to that to illustrate. In the second view controller, we never set title label, so that's also nil. And so, let's see. So, another hint, you can also do GDB commands in here for all the GDB wizards, and you can inspect that way. If you're really lazy, you can do that. So that guy's nil, so we're not going to set it. And then we go in here, it loaded up. Let's see what happens here. Does title label exist? Yes, it exists. See, this is what we want to see. We want to see that title label is an object with actual properties. But will it show up? That's the hard part. So let's see, does it show up? It was set by memory, but it's not really going correctly. So, anyone, where's the string come from? Ahmed is so cool. I want it to be Ahmed is super awesome, right? This comes from interface builder, because by default, it's Ahmed is so cool. So, alright, let's go here. Let's see, title text. Does that exist? No, it doesn't. So when it tries to set the label, it will set it, but it's a nil string, so it's going to be blank. And then all we have to do is just fix it back. And then things will work as we expect them to. So set this guy back to title text, and then let's see what happens. And this is really, like I like to mention so often, this is where it goes from being just a coder to an engineer. Because a coder, anyone can write code, but fixing these problems, figuring them out, that's what makes you an engineer. So it exists. Title text is nil, but after we set it, it also exists and has a string. And then we go in here and try to set it to the contents of title text. It has the correct string. And then when we go and try to debug it, Ahmed is super awesome. Cool. Cool, cool. So let's go over the fun parts, the final parts. I call them advanced, they're really not. Alright, see you back in a few. Okay, congratulations, we survived debugging. Now let's go over a couple of last slides on some of these more advanced features. These ones are really fun and should help speed things up even more. So the first one are advanced asset catalogs. These are brand new with iOS 7. The reason they're important, when Apple switched from the iPhone 3 GS to the 4, from the regular screen to the Retina screens, everyone, like the Retina has twice the pixel density for regular screen, but one thing they added with that is a requirement that to make an image look good on Retina, you need to have like a 2x version, so one where it's twice as dense. And the problem with that was when you're developing an app, you have to like include 2 of each image in the project, otherwise it's going to look like garbage when it's on the phone. You also have to make sure like the naming is the exact same, that it has at 2x or it won't work. All this really annoying, nasty stuff. But the cool thing, the reason we're talking about asset catalogs is now they've made it so that all you do is there's this file XCasset, then you make a record for your image, like app icon, and then throughout your code you just refer to that one master name for your image, and then within there you just like drag and drop all the sizes you need. Like you'll drag and drop the 1x version, the 2x version. If it's an app icon, you'll drag like all 10 sizes Apple needs or whatever, and then there you go. And even cooler thing is when you're referencing it in your code, you just do image named, and it's the name of the master. You don't have any of that 2x stuff or whatever. It's really cool. It's a bit annoying at first because if you do it wrong, it'll show you all these error messages. But it makes things so fast, especially when you're doing like app icons and launch images and Retina, where you have billions of copies of the same image. Like, it'll prevent your like project folder from being a huge mess. Cool. All right, and the last thing is compatibility mode. So we all know iOS 6 and iOS 7 look very different, but there's still a lot of iOS 6 devices. There are a lot of iOS 6 devices out in the wild, right? I think what was it? Yeah, someone was asking a bit earlier before the talk, like, why should you even develop for iOS 6? Why should you handle it? Like, isn't the number so low compared to iOS 7? Yeah, right now I think the last number I read was about 87% adoption, but we all know somebody who, I'll put it this way, if you have gadget lust, like I often do, we always get a new iPad, right? Or we'll get a new iPad every couple of years. But the old iPads, they don't just disappear. We either give them to a friend or sell them to a family member, or like, sell them to some like used electronics service or whatever. They don't go away. They still stay in the wild. And Apple will support them for a couple of years, but then they'll be frozen in time. They won't stop working. They just won't run anything greater than a version. So a lot of times we're doing apps. If we're trying to like target a lot of times when we do an app, we'll look at who we're writing the app for. Like, is it for like trendy, like 20-somethings, or is it for business? And then we'll look at what they're using, right? So like a trendy 20-something, maybe using iOS 7. They may be like 95% iOS 7. But if we're doing business, right, even though like by the numbers, 87% is iOS 7, organization that has 1,000 iPads, right? They might not account for like 0.5%, but within that organization, that's 1,000 iPads, and everyone's on iOS 6. So we still have to write code for iOS 6 sometimes. And getting that back to here, what's really cool is that you can develop an application now, and with the aid of interface builder, even though you're like primarily writing the UI for iOS 7, you can actually go to the file inspector and switch it over and see what it'll look like on 6. This is really cool and really important because everyone, like, iOS 7 looks drastically different from 6, right? It's less skeuomorphic. It looks less like the real world, and it's more flat. But along with that, the UI elements behave differently. So like the default style for a button in 7 is just like text, whereas it's rounded, like a traditional like Mac or Windows style desktop button with like a rounded border around it. And along with like it looking different, it'll behave differently. So like the background attribute may work on one but not the other. So all you have to do is go to the file inspector and switch the view as from 6 to 7, and then you get to preview it. And then what I like to do is I'll switch it, I'll see what's wrong, I'll either fix it in Interface Builder or in my code, rerun it, see if it works, then switch it back. Another big thing for this is your deployment target. So in your build settings, make sure it'll only load the view as for the deployment targets you select. So if you're targeting like 7 only, it won't give you the option to view iOS 6 because your binary is not going to work on 6, only 7. But if you have it set to like 6 or 5, it'll let you preview both of that. Finally, one last thing is when I have a specific code, like how I said, stuff won't actually behave the same way. Sometimes when it doesn't behave the same way, it's because the code is totally different. So I'll put in like an if def, and I'll usually define something. I have an example down here, device is iOS 7. This is just like a little macro for checking the device type. And then I'll put my code for the specific platform in there. So if I want to access like background shading color or whatever, and it's only on iOS 7, I'll say if iOS 7, set this line of code. Otherwise, ignore it. Because it might not exist in 6. It may behave differently in 6. And finally, if it doesn't exist and you try to call it, it'll give you a crash. So cool. Alright guys, so welcome back. Now we're in the home stretch. some fun features, 3 features. There were 2 in the slides, but it's really 3. So let's go over that really quickly. So first guy we're going to talk about asset catalogs. Like I was saying, this is a way of having the same icon or the same image and launching it multiple times. So I'll just show you an example. So Apple wants you to support all these different app icons, right? And usually you have to manage it manually. So the old way, right? I am basically, I have my images folder, my designer gives me all these files. But like, I don't want to do what I did here and copy them all on manually. So all I do is I just they'll give you the example, like it should be 29 point, 40 point, 60 point, and you take your image and you drag it in, and you drag in all the correct images, and then it'll line up everything for you. So let's see what's happening. I may get an error. We'll try to run. What's cool is instead of, as well as doing the compilation, it'll also tell you if there's errors of your images. So I put in a file that was 29 pixels. It wants it to be 58. So let's put in 58. Does it work? It works. And then you can add in extra stuff, and that'll also do the same jazz. So let's see this. Bam, everything works. So it's cool. Then let's run the app and see what happens. So we defined the app icon, and let's go back. Is there an app icon? Yes, there's an app icon, which is conveniently the same as one of my other app icons. Cool. So that's an icon. Let's do an image. So we have different image sizes. So same thing. We do image set. We name it. I'll call this startup or start image. And then we take the 2 versions of the image that we had somewhere else that our designer gave us, and we just put them in here. And then, cool. Let's put that on the view and see what happens. Image view. Alright. Put our little buddy inside of an image. By the way, if you want to move things, if you want to put like one image beneath the other or above it, you can rearrange it in here. I'll show you how that works. So like, how I said the master name shows up? There's our master name. There's our master image. Let's put our buddy inside of it. So right now it appears over there, over on top of it, right? It's not what we want. We want it to be under, so we just rearrange it and then it's under. And then we can size him, and now it looks more presentable, right? Now our little buddy is inside the big circle. And then let's run it. And it runs correctly. Cool. That's the asset catalog. It really speeds things up, and as you can tell, we're starting to get a lot of files in here, and it's only going to get worse. Like if you have like 20 images or whatever, and you have all the different sizes, that's easily 80 images. So next feature, which is really 2 features. Let's talk about compatibility. So like we mentioned earlier, you can have an app that runs on iOS 6 and 7. So let's make this an app that works on both. We go to project settings and change the target to 6. This means it'll compile it for 6 and 7. And then look, new stuff happens, like a new error popped up that we didn't have before. It wants another image. Alright. So when that happens, it'll ask you, and then you just follow the instructions, it'll fix it. But we're not interested in that right now. We're interested in compatibility. So right now we're viewing it as a flat UI, right? We want to see what happens when we're on iOS 6. So what you do, you select your view controller. Then you go to the file inspector, right, the very first one. And you say view as, and you change it to 6. And then we change to 6, and what happens? All the buttons are different, right? So this is a good way to inspect it, and then once you know that, you can start changing things like, oh, the background color didn't work. Maybe I should do something else. Like for iOS 6, what's cool about 7 is that you get this ability to make a square button. Before, what we had to do is we'd manually have to make an image of a square and put it as a background label. So that's compatibility mode, but that's not the only thing we need to handle. We also need to handle the screen resizing, because let's kill this. We don't need it. We have an iPhone 4 and an iPhone 5. How do we test it out? So when you're on Interface Builder, this little icon here, this guy, will stretch the screen. So how do you stretch the screen? You well, if you look here, it's clipping, right? It's getting rid of the bottom half of the screen. We don't want that to happen. We want to fix it. So what you do, you go to the what is it? Constraint, and so you go to the what's it called? The size inspector, and then this will show you if you have any constraints. I don't right now. I can go in here at these little icons and set things. Like I can set alignment if I want it to be in the center, horizontally or vertically. I can set if I want it leading edges, like if I always want it to be at the front, or I can go in here and manually set everything myself. So what do I know? The button's always going to be 320, it's always going to be 50, and it's always going to be at the bottom. So let's set these. You can set it by clicking the dotted lines and making them solid, and then clicking these clicking these checkboxes. Then you do add, and we look at the inspector. They're here. So let's see what happens. We want to preview it, so you do apply, and then what happens? It's gonna follow. We'll move this out of the way so it doesn't bother us. When do we do it the right way? I have 2 buttons. That's bad. We'll move this out of the way, and then let's squish it and see what happens. Oh, it's moving. So that's cool stuff. Just remember, you need to set the attributes, otherwise it won't happen. By default, it'll just lay it out as a frame. So you need to do some extra logic. Sometimes too, you can use this and do reset to suggested constraints, and it'll try to set constraints for you. So we did that, and luckily it worked. But if we look in here, there's going to be some errors, and it'll actually tell you this is missing. Maybe you should fix this. So I want to fix it, so I'll just do clear constraints, and then I'll manually set it. I know this is going to be the same, this is going to be the same, and I always want it to be over the other one, so I set that. And then there we go. And then that's how you really start adapting your UI to work on both iPhone 4 and iPhone 5. Good stuff. You guys doing an awesome job, and really thank you for hanging in there so long. For some design resources, you can either Google it or follow this URL. Just look up iOS design resources. Apple has this really great guide on what an app should look like. Well, they're examples of what an app should look like and how it should work. And there's a lot of tutorials. So just check out iOS 7 design resources. It's the easiest way to find that. If you need me, you can email me, info@devatelier.com, or visit my website, devatelier.com. I also am increasing my blog and putting these videos up on there, so you can always follow them there or just ask me questions directly. I'll try to put up a talk every time I go to an event. And finally, we will be at Macworld heading out tomorrow, so if anyone's going up there, I'll see you on Thursday. We're at booth 405. Good stuff. Well, thanks, everyone. Yeah, just email me if you have questions, and I hope you have a good evening. I hope everyone go to dinner. That's the most important part. All right, thanks. Bye.